Hello and welcome to the Deep State Consciousness podcast. Today I'm joined by Britt Tanya. Britt is a conscious coach working in the southwest of England, and today she's going to tell us what that's all about. Britt, good morning.
Good morning.
So when I use the term conscious or consciousness, I was thinking about this, and I suppose I use it as a kind of replacement word for spiritual in some ways, because that word's become so vague, so with a similar meaning. And I wondered if that's what conscious coaching is. Is it a kind of spiritual coaching? But as well as putting that question to you, I think I need to also ask you to explain it and also explain what normal run-of-the-mill coaching is, because I don't think I understand that well enough to go on to the advanced level of what conscious coaching is. Yet.
Okay. So I suppose my understanding of consciousness, or being more conscious, is not necessarily spiritual, although I sort of consider myself as a spiritual person. To me, it's really just about being more aware of ourselves, how we work, how we affect the life that we live. Are we creating what we want in the world, or are we sort of creating a bit of a mess? For me, it's, I suppose, understanding how we operate as humans and how we can use our humanness to have a better experience.
Okay, and how does that, what's the difference then if I went to what does a normal coach do? If,
it's different. So, should I share coaching and how it's different to, say, mentoring or therapy and things like that?
Yeah, it might be really helpful, actually, because I'm a bit dense on these things, so that would be good.
That's fine. It's absolutely fine. So coaching is very future focused, and it's very much about the client. So an analogy that you can use for coaching is a bit like I'm a taxi driver. So my client comes in and they tell me where they want to go, and I take them there in the quickest possible method that I can. Mentoring is where the person who you're working with knows more than you do. So they're an expert in their field, and you go to them to learn, how to progress in your field to get to wherever they are. With the coaching, I have coached people who have absolutely no knowledge of their industry. I've coached people in the brewery industry. I've coached bankers. I've coached people in the diamond industry. I've coached people in oil and gas industries. So I've got a very wide array of people that I can coach, and I don't specifically have to know their life and what's going on in it to be an effective coach. In fact, it actually sometimes is better that you know little, because then you don't have any preconceived ideas of what and how they should be doing things. So that's coaching and mentoring. Therapy is obviously helping somebody with a particular sort of challenge or issue that they've got, and that can quite often be reflective and looking back at the past and exploring what was going on. With coaching, it's not like that. It's very practical and future focused and very action orientated generally as well. What are they going to be doing? And people follow up with coaching. It's done generally on a fairly regular basis, where you check in with the client and make sure that they are making the changes they've agreed to make. Whereas with therapy and things like that, that isn't necessarily the case, that people are sort of being held accountable for the actions that they've chosen to take.
Okay, great. Now, it does, yeah. Now, from reading some of the testimonies on your website, I was hearing people say things like, with other coaching I've done, it's all been focused on actions in the world I could take. And Britt's coaching got me to think inwardly as well about my inner attitudes and values and this kind of thing. So is that kind of conscious coaching?
Yes, and with consciousness coaching, quite often what we do is we share things that we call awarenesses with the clients. So, for instance, like most companies and their values will have things like they want to have integrity and authenticity, but not many people actually know how to increase their integrity and to do those sort of things. So with a conscious coaching, we'll actually share awarenesses with them, but we'll make sure that they know that that's not part of the coaching. So we'll say, I'm going to share an awareness with you around integrity, so that they get a deeper understanding for how who they're being in the world affects the world and how they can change it so that they can get the results that they want to get. So that part is, I suppose, it's creating greater awareness in the client. And that's where the difference between conscious coaching and other coaching tends to come in.
Okay, a lot of stuff I've seen in the spiritual world that sort of relates to this is looking at how we sabotage our own efforts on some level. That we have a desire to have a successful business or a relationship or something like that, but then we have fears about that because we saw how money has affected other people, or we saw like our parents' relationship, and we don't want to go into that. So overtly, I think, yeah, what am I doing? I'm going on dating sites, I'm meeting the right people, I'm really trying, and it's just not happening for me. And there's some inner thing that I'm like in floating around in my own conscious that's blocking me. And I wonder, does conscious coaching speak to that?
Definitely. Very, very much so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, the becoming more aware deals with that unconsciousness within us, because 90% or 90, actually they say it's actually closer to 99% of our reality is created by the programs and the beliefs that we've already developed within our unconscious or subconscious mind. And it's that projection onto our life that creates the life that we experience. So by becoming more aware of how we work, so that you can understand how the unconscious and this, or subconscious, I tend to call it subconscious, although technically speaking, I think it is unconscious, how that sort of, how that works us or gets us to create what we create in our life. So I see it between, I like to sort of be gentle with ourselves. The way I see it is, when we're born, we're automated. So for us to survive in the world, we need to have certain inbuilt mechanisms that ensures our physical survival. Otherwise, we just keep on doing the same things that would sort of endanger our sort of physical being. So we're born with this amazing automated system that keeps us alive. But at some point that is just not enough, because being alive and living are two very different things. And most of us on this planet really want to enjoy being alive. And that, for me, is where it helps to then become more conscious and to realize, A, what it is in your subconscious that you have driving you, so that you can make different choices. And for me, the fascination has been how does it do that?
Yeah.
How does it show up in my life? And, what can I learn that can hack the system and make my life a lot easier?
Yeah, it's amazing when you have success with it, isn't it, for the first time? Because then you see how powerful it is. And it does become
Absolutely.
like fascinatingly interesting then, because I know, okay, if I can just make those adjustments, then life goes on a widely different tangent all of a sudden, and all for the better.
Well, it suddenly opens up, doesn't it? I mean, instead of like one possible route, you suddenly have like 100 different routes that you kind of were hiding that you never saw before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm aware from reading your biography on the website, you were doing well in the business world before getting into coaching. Yes. So what inspired you to put that down and make that shift?
Well, it's actually, strangely enough, just what I was talking about. So before, it was really just about surviving. So I got divorced when my kids were very young. My youngest one was only a year old. And I went from a lady of leisure to suddenly having to make a living. And the opportunity that came along was working in the wine industry, importing wine. I was living in Botswana at the time, importing wine into Botswana and distributing it throughout Botswana, which was wonderful because unknowingly I had created exactly what I wanted, which was enough time to be with my children and not an office job. So a lot of the work I did from home, so I was always around for them. But it was very, very demanding. There was always something going wrong with it. And in the end, I didn't really enjoy it. I enjoyed the socializing. I enjoyed sort of meeting people and that element of it. But I didn't enjoy the sales and the marketing and pushing it all the time. And I always knew, I don't know how or why, but I knew inside myself that I was here for a reason on this earth. And I knew that the wine business wasn't that. It was more of a means to an end. And I kept asking. I don't even know what I was asking, but just sort of constantly in my mind, sort of, what am I here for? What am I meant to be doing on this earth? And then, somebody mentioned, have you thought about coaching? So I tried different things. I tried Reiki, I tried body talk, I tried access consciousness, and none of them, I couldn't really see myself doing any of them for a living. Whilst I found them wildly interesting and absolutely fascinating, it wasn't something I could see myself doing as a career. And then someone mentioned coaching, and they said to me, well, just go and Google it, you'll find the right one. And as I Googled it, the very first one that came up was consciousness coaching. And I explored many other ones, but that was the one that it sort of fitted in so many different elements of who I was and really spoke to me. And that was that. So.
Okay. And it suggests, would it be right to say, it suggests a certain desire on your part to help people become in the world, to become who they want to be, as opposed to resolving.
Yes.
trauma?
I think actually my real motivating factor, when I did the course, I didn't realize what my motivating factor was when I started the course. But through doing it, they say your greatest passions come from your greatest pains. And my greatest pains, as we mentioned just before we started on the on the actual thing, was from being bullied and also being in an abusive relationship. And it's that abuse of power, which I find just absolutely, I don't know, I can't even, there's not even words for the emotions it brings up in me. And so I suppose the opposite of that is bringing a way that people can be powerful without having to use force into the world. So not being scared of being powerful, but being powerful in a way that brings joy and brings, nourishment to people rather than taking away from people. So that, I suppose, really is what motivates me, is to share that there are ways for us to be powerful in the world where we don't have to harm others or the planet or anyone else in being that.
Right. Do you find people have a fear of power sometimes because they see it as being intertwined with being abusive?
Absolutely, because one of my biggest struggles was finding a word for what it is that I actually want to bring. Because if you use power, it's immediately thought of as force. There is no word in the English dictionary. I think the closest I got was to charismatic, because charismatic means something with the energy of God or something like that. But we don't use the word in the right way to be able to use it as I wanted to use it. So,
yeah, we don't. No, no, I didn't know that was the dictionary definition. And I also saw,
done my research on trying to find the word.
Yeah. I saw you'd mentioned figures like Nelson Mandela and Gandhi as inspirations for this kind of approach.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think of the things that they achieved, and they didn't do it through force. I mean, Mandela, I suppose, started off trying to use force. But when he came out of prison, he was a very, very different person. And I suppose I was fortunate because I was brought up in South Africa during apartheid, but we went to a mixed race school. So it was like I lived in a bubble. I lived in this culture of apartheid, but I was actually very unaware of it at a young age. Because it wasn't part of my daily life, even though it was part of everyone else's daily life.
Was that, I mean, I don't know that much about apartheid South Africa, but was that common at the time, mixed race schools? That's not...
No, not at all. We used to get bomb threats and things.
Right.
And it was weird because, again, I was completely oblivious. I mean, I didn't understand the real threat. And we just used to get excited because we used to get off class and go and play up in the field while they got the sniffer dogs in and stuff. So for me, it was just all a bit of a joke. It's only now looking back as an adult that I realize how serious it all was. I mean, I've got a photograph of us going on a school trip, and we had to hire the entire coach of a train because they weren't allowed to have mixed people in the same carriage. So for us to travel together as a class, we had to hire an entire carriage so that we could all go in there. And we've got a photo of us sticking our heads out the windows. And in Afrikaans, it says net blanks, so only whites. And I was just, I wasn't aware of all of that while I was there. But then I left, and sort of looking back on it, I was really quite shocked, I suppose, by what was going on.
Because, of course, I remember it, going on in the 80s. And when you talk about it, it feels like something that happened 200 years ago now as well, that you could do that and get away with it,
Exactly. So, and then so I moved away from South Africa, but then I found myself back just for 6 weeks, and not intentionally. It was over Freedom Day, so it was when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. And it was just the most amazing thing. I was working in a shopping center as a waitress, and everybody in the entire shopping center, every culture, creed, nationality, whatever, came out, and we held hands up and down through the stairs, on the escalators, all the way sort of around the shopping center, and had a minute's silence. And it was just so incredibly moving to be with that many people all together, all in solidarity of the same thing. And that's what Nelson Mandela achieved. I mean, he unified people that were ready to kill each other. And he didn't do it through force. He did it through his presence and through who he was being. And I suppose that has been my sort of, since I've gone on this path, my mission is to understand both him and Gandhi, understand how they did what they did, so that more of us, because there's so many people in the world wanting to create change, but how they're going about it is through force and making things wrong. Gandhi and Mandela, although they stood for what was right, They didn't actively sort of force against what was wrong.
Okay, so that brings up a couple of questions for me.
Just a couple.
Yeah, well, no, it doesn't. It brings up many, many questions, and I could talk to you about this all day. I'm trying to, I'll try and limit it to a couple for now. So I'm curious then, how do you take this Mandela archetype almost, or the Gandhi archetype, and translate that into something for someone who's trying to develop a business on one level or have something in their lives? And my second question, I'll give you them both at once. When you refer to the kind of movements going on in the world that are doing things through force, I wonder how you see, like, if there's particular ones you're drawn to or feel could benefit from an infusion of that kind of wisdom now.
Okay.
There's two there.
Okay, so let me start with the first question. It was actually interesting. I had a collaboration with another couple of ladies, actually. We were developing a leadership program. And we'd all actually done the consciousness coaching training, which was lovely because we used similar language and we understood each other. And in defining how we would fit what we do together, it was interesting having the discussion, because what I realized is what I focus on is beingness. And again, I'm limited by our vocabulary because it doesn't really make sense. To me, it's the very basis of who we are. It's like the starting point of any transformation is looking at who we're being in the world. And it's almost like because we're so used to dealing with the outside world and adapting ourselves to fit into the outside world, we can't always see that the change needs to happen within ourselves, and that when we change ourselves, everything else changes. So that's really what I work with people, is to change who they're being in the world so that they show up differently and their experience is different. And that affects people in everything. It affects them in business, in corporate, in relationships, or in every single possible manner. Does that answer what you were asking about that, or have I gone off on a tangent?
I think it does, yeah. I'll reflect on that and see if there's anything more, but that
Okay.
does, yeah.
And to me, that is the most powerful thing, is I mean, again, sort of looking at the values and things that they have in businesses and corporates, one of the main ones that most companies have is authenticity. And again, it's a wonderful thing to have there, but most people don't know what it means to be authentic. And the power that you have by being authentic, we've sort of learned how to hide ourselves, and we've made parts of us wrong, and we've shut things down. And as soon as we do that, we have to almost try and use manipulation or subterfuge to get what we want. But actually, our true power lies in being authentic and being open and honest and transparent. But it's uncomfortable because we've been taught that it's a weakness and that it makes us vulnerable. And if we're vulnerable, we're likely to die. At least that's how our brain interprets it, which is actually completely nonsense. But anyway, so I help people to come back to that state.
When I read the testimonials on your website from business people, they're all saying that their business got better, right, through
Absolutely.
the intervention, which speaks to it being a benefit. Because when you're saying there about vulnerability and openness and this kind of thing, it doesn't necessarily instantly hit me. Okay, and that would be something that would make a business better.
Exactly. You wouldn't think so.
Not, really. So yeah, it's really interesting to
again
see that connection. And not just think, okay, it's nice to be open and vulnerable, but I don't think it will help my business. See that there's a power to openness and vulnerability too, I think is fascinating.
Exactly. And that goes back to understanding how we work as humans. So if we look at like our subconscious and our conscious, the way we work subconsciously and consciously, our subconscious mind can process, I think it's like 400 million bits per second or something like that. Whereas our conscious mind can only process something like 50,000 or something bits per second. So subconsciously, when you interact with somebody or a company or an organization, you take in absolutely everything that's going on. So you take on whether they're manipulating you, that you take on how they're selling stuff to you, how they're doing it, but consciously you're not aware of all of that information. So by becoming more vulnerable, more transparent, and more open and authentic and all of those things, subconsciously people really get you, but consciously they might not understand why. So that's really where the power is it's in the unseen, but in the the understanding of. if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. No, it really does. Okay, so with the second question then, I didn't expect to go in the political direction, but it's fascinating to do so. I think a big interest of mine over the past few years is I've seen society, I think, become more divided, particularly in Britain and the United States. In Britain, there was the Brexit thing, and in the United States, the Trump thing, were these two phenomena that have separated society, where one half finds the other utterly incomprehensible in the political and economic decisions that they think are going to be the right way to go, and vice versa. And what seems to be coming from that is a lot of angry, divisive rhetoric. Okay. And an interesting question for me then has been, so what's the role of spirituality in this? Is the role of spirituality to pick the right decisions, the right economic policies, the right political policies, the right policies on immigration or whatever, and support and push that? Or is the role of a spiritual approach to facilitate some kind of dialogue or reconciliation, or putting down of one's own opinions and understanding the other? So that's been what's going on for me. And I wonder, with regard to what you've been saying about Nelson Mandela, about Gandhi, and your coaching, how do you see that playing out? How do you see the kind of work you do, the perspective you take, could be useful on that more political level with the divide that goes on there?
I suppose, and it's this, I mean, this goes back to a direct quote from Gandhi: it's to be the change in the world. That does not say you make the world change, it's to be the change. So if you want to, I mean, I use the word love, loosely, because it's not that romantic love. To me, love, the energy of love, is about being open. When we're open, life flows through us, and we're engaged in life, and we're present, and we can experience it, and it's joyous, and it's gratitude. It's an amazing energy. So who I want to be in the world is that. And when I interact with things, there's a wonderful, it's a pity that we're not standing together, actually, because there's a super duper experiment that I do with people to do with pushing their hands together. So I'll try and explain it. So two people stand with their hands parallel, one person with their hands on the outside and the other person with their hands on the inside. The person with their hands on the inside has to resist the person pushing them inward. And they do it twice. So the first time I get people to do it, I ask the outside person to force the inside person's hands together as hard as they possibly can. And the person on the inside has to resist as hard as they can both times. And then the second time, I ask the person pushing the hands together, instead of forcing them, to connect to the person in front's heart, sort of energetically, to connect to all that is, and to remember a time when they felt completely inspired, moved, in love, or whatever it is, and to then bring their hands together. And I've done this with hundreds and hundreds of people. And when they are in that space, the person resisting cannot resist. It's amazing. Their hands just melt together. And I suppose that's where I see my role, is to bring that energy and to teach people how to be from that space, so that we can melt resistance and, diffuse things rather than force them. Yeah,
I've seen examples of that, actually. I studied Aikido throughout my 20s and continue to do so.
Yeah.
And I met Aikido is a Japanese martial art which has a kind of peace and love and oneness philosophy running through it. And I had the pleasure of meeting this American teacher, Paul Linden, once, who had really developed the idea of how the psyche is affecting the body, and how having a loving consciousness is just far more powerful than being angry. And he'd do exercises like where you get a towel and you'd hit a chair as hard as you could, feeling as angry as you could, and then you'd evoke these feelings of love and warmth and oneness, and then hit the chair again, and you'd find the slapping sound it made was far more powerful on the second attempt when you used the power coming from love. And you can even feel it in your body if I monitored like what's going on there, and the body is just far more coordinated and works as one unit when it's got this feeling of love running through it, as opposed to a feeling of anger or separation.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you think about it, when we are in a state of fear or anger or whatever else, you can physically feel yourself become denser. and sort of close in and sort of protect and go into resistance. And when we do that, we stop the flow of energy. I mean, if you look under a microscope, we are all energy. And the way I see it is that we have energy flowing through us, and we even call it in the spiritual sort of world, being in the flow is like a state that we all aspire to being in. Well, to be in the state of flow, we need to be open. And to be open, you need to be in a state of love or grace or joy or whatever else. So for us to allow the universe, whatever you want to call it, life, to work with us, we need to be open, and we can only do that if we remain in that space. And I think that the more of us that can do that, the more choices that we make that come from that space, the more we will shift everything in our reality, including the government and everything else, and the choices being made around us.
Yeah, and that's a different level of an answer to that, I suppose, what was in my mind when I asked the question.
Exactly, because what you were asking, I think, is what do we do about it? And then remember I said to you, a lot of people focus on the external world.
Yeah.
And to me, when we focus on the external world, it's that sort of pushing it away from us. But what I would rather do is say, okay, well, who do I need to be? Because who I am being will have much more of an impact than in me making something wrong and trying to externally change something. Because as soon as you try to change something externally, you've made it wrong. And if you've made it wrong, there's resistance, and then there's a blockage in energy. You can experience something and say, that's uncomfortable, I don't enjoy that. Who do I want to be in the presence of that? And then that might change. But to actually physically make it wrong and fight it and try and force it to change just creates more of the same thing.
Okay, thank you for that. To finish up, I'd just like you to talk about the work you're doing now. Now you're in the south. You're based in Bath, aren't you? In the southwest of England.
I am based in Bath.
And do you do coaching online as well as in your geographical area? You do? Okay. Yep. So, well, please just say anything you'd like to say about your work, your business, your coaching, what you offer people, how they can get in touch with you, that kind of thing.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I suppose my main passion is for coaching leaders and executives and things like that, purely because who they are within the organization, if they can sort of change or, see the world differently, who they're being within the organization has the greatest impact on everyone else within the organization. So I kind of see it as the quickest way to work with as many people as I can to create the biggest amount of change. But having said that, I also work with entrepreneurs and individuals as well. So I'm open to working with anybody. And I've had quite a lot of work with people in relationships, although that's not always been sought out, but it tends to sort of come towards me. What I'm also doing at the moment, I've actually just been asked to be on the board for the International Coaching Federation. So I'm going to be working with them to promote coaching within the UK, so that people really understand what the difference is of working with somebody who has qualified as a coach to somebody who's just decided to call themselves a coach and work in that field. So I'm doing that. I'm also working with Bath Future Talent Programme to develop young talent here in Bath. And I have been asked, or actually, funnily enough, had a conversation with somebody earlier today about working with ex-offenders, which I would love to do too, because I really do believe that we have the power to create our experience in the world. And I'd like to bring that to people who don't necessarily think they have a choice or think that life has sort of been rather nasty to them.
Okay, thanks for that. I find this incredibly interesting because I think that on one level, I meet a lot of people in the spiritual world who would like to do things but have a difficulty with the power concept or manifesting it. And the other thing I find very interesting is the testimonials page on your website has all these people who are senior in big corporations applying these kind of what I would call spiritual principles and finding it has a positive effect on their business. So I'll put a link into your website, and I think I might drop it right onto that testimonials page actually, so people can see that. And Britt's website also has a whole video blog, a vlog on it of lots of short videos giving coaching advice. So people can check that out too.
Oh, just one last thing as well is it's not just coaching that I do. I also do training. So I actually go into organizations that aren't functioning and help them to see how they can shift and what they need to change so that they can get the organization to perform at a much higher level, but using the methodologies that I do and using the conscious awareness.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Britt. And I hope to speak to you again on the podcast again sometime.
Super. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks.